Treatable. Really, it's treatable. Yes, it's treatable. It's the Treatable Podcast. See what's on your mind. It's the Treatable Podcast. Real, coming, treatable. It's the Treatable Podcast. It's all on the Treatable Podcast.
Imagine your body as a fortress with your immune system as the loyal guards. Now picture those guards suddenly turning on the very fortress that they're meant to protect. This is the essence of autoimmune diseases, conditions where our body's defense mechanism becomes our own worst enemy. But what triggers this internal rebellion? Can it be reversed or even prevented? And how does your mental health play a role? Welcome to the Treatable Podcast with me, your host, Clint Mally. You've likely encountered autoimmune disorders before, whether personally or through someone you know, and these conditions can manifest in countless, even mysterious ways. But what causes them really? Well, we have a pro here who's going to help us unpack that very topic and explain how our mental health plays a key role. Today, we're sitting down with Dr. David Bilstrom. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Integrative Medicine and American Academy of Medical Acupuncture, and he is an advanced fellow in anti-aging, regenerative, and functional medicine. Dr. Bilstrom is also a quadruple board certified in functional and regenerative medicine, integrative medicine, physical medicine, rehabilitation, and medical acupuncture. He's the director of the International Autoimmune Institute and the Brigham Memorial Center for Functional Medicine, which is the first medical center in the country associated with teaching hospitals to treat all types of autoimmune diseases. It's also the first to use nature and its ability to improve the human health and well-being as an integral part for the wellness program.
Treatable Podcast. It's all on the Treatable Podcast.
Dr. David, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we always want to start our episodes with getting a definition for the things that we're going to be talking about in simple everyday language. So when you talk about autoimmune disorders, what is it? What is an autoimmune disorder?
Yeah, so inherently, classically, autoimmune disease has been the part of the immune system called the adaptive immune system will make antibodies to attack things that are not us and are going to hurt us. So if an infection gets in, like a cold virus, it's not us, it's just going to hurt us. So our immune system will make an antibody specific for that particular virus, attack it, kill the virus, get it out of the system in a reasonable amount of time. So like if we get a cold, we don't have it for 20 years. We have it for 4 to 5 days, it's gone. Next cold virus that comes in, same thing happens. Classically, autoimmune diseases where the immune system will actually start making antibodies attacking our own body parts and then destroying those body parts. And basically, we're self-destructing at that point. And it's always going to be very counterproductive for our health and well-being if we're self-destructing. Never a good idea. Now, also, we've realized the last few years is the other part of the immune system called the innate immune system that's involved in inflammation control can also get thrown out of whack. And then inflammation produced in a body part, we can't put out the fire. And the inflammation just builds, and then destroys that body part as well. And so this is where when you talk about autoimmune disease, every body part can be involved, even though hundreds of different names for different autoimmune diseases based on what body parts being attacked. Truly, it's really just one disease that can attack any body part. Thus, it's so important to fix why you're attacking one body part and get rid of it, and then you're feeling, healthy and happy all over again. But if you don't do that, well, then as time goes on, you just start attacking a second body part, and then a third body part, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth. And I can't tell you the number of 8-year-old kids that we see that already have like 4 or 5 autoimmune diseases already.
8 years old?
Multiple body parts being attacked already. Yep.
Okay. Let's unpack this a little bit more. So 2 questions kind of related to this topic. One is, what is the prevalence of people in our world and our population that might have an autoimmune disorder? And then 2, can you kind of give us some of the common names that people might have heard of as the common autoimmune disorders they might see in everyday life?
It's an epidemic. absolute epidemic worldwide. And so, for example, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease attacking the joints. A lot of people have heard about rheumatoid arthritis in adults where you might get gnarly knuckles and knees and you lose strength and you can't even function because the joints are so destroyed. Well, you have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which is the childhood form, where there's 300,000 children in the US alone with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. 70% of all autism is one particular autoimmune disease. And 1 in 48 children in North America have autism, 1 in 164 worldwide, epidemic of autism. And then you have numbers like systemic lupus in adults, though children can get it too. And you have 20, 30, 40,000 people in the US alone with that. And multiple sclerosis is another common one. Psoriasis and eczema are other common ones. So we're talking kind of every one of those. It's like 100,000 here or 50,000 there, 300,000 there. And so truly, it's probably about 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 2 people in the US has an autoimmune disease. Now, we're also recognizing that a lot of things that we didn't know were autoimmune disease are actually autoimmune related. And so this is where autism, for example, we didn't realize has such a huge autoimmune component to it. But then again, things like osteoporosis, thinning of the bones, even the heart attacks and strokes are part of this immune system disruption. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, Lou Gehrig's disease. We now realize that all of these different things are a disruption of this immune system, creating excess inflammation, damaging body parts. It's all the classics that people might have heard, as well as the ones they've heard about that they didn't know were autoimmune disease, but also is tied into all chronic disease.
So in recap, autoimmune disease is the body attacking itself. And it shows up in a lot of different variations in a lot of different ways, but usually it's not good. It's things that make us feel worse in our everyday life if it goes untreated. It could be thinner bones. It could be chronic pain within our joints. It could be itchy or scratchy skin or plaqued skin. So there's a ton of different ways that this shows up. And then the underlying question that everyone's probably wondering is, why would the body attack itself? Do we have any idea or understanding for the underlying reasons behind this?
Fortunately, the science is very clear. Unfortunately, not a lot of people understand the science. The more traditional way of dealing with this stuff, if possible, is to use medicines that will suppress an overactive immune system, trying to quiet down that overactive immune system that basically is attacking the body and all this kind of stuff. It's a real shame because the science is very clear why this stuff happens. And the science is very clear about how we can reverse the process and get rid of what's going on already in the person. But also, we've now done our due diligence to prevent new body parts from being attacked and new diseases from coming out as time goes on. And so one thing we're trying to do is changing the way that autoimmune disease is dealt with worldwide is actually educating people that we do know where this stuff comes from. We do know how to reverse it. The science has been going on for 20, 30, 40 years already about this. It's just not typically the science that people will hear about. And the science that people typically hear about is the science of what medicine might I use to put a bandage on a couple symptoms so that my joints don't hurt as much, my skin's not as itchy, my brain is not as involved with this stuff. But then the underlying root cause keeps pushing it the wrong way. And so people just keep getting worse and worse, even though they're on a medicine that may have given them some temporary relief of a few of the symptoms.
So we know that just using pharmacological means to be able to treat the pains or the symptoms of autoimmune disease is not overly helpful. It doesn't reverse it. It doesn't make it stop. It might make life a little bit more manageable in the short term, but it doesn't address the underlying cause. So what is the underlying cause?
So the body's very complex. So there's multiple causes all at the same time. Now, a real big central mechanism tends to be the gut. And for a lot of years, we've heard sort of this gut-brain connection to the point where, like, if I see somebody's got any kind of brain thing going on, whether it's memory, concentration, whether it's depression, anxiety, whether it's bipolar, schizophrenia, migraines, seizures, autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, all this kind of stuff, is basically the first thing you should think about is what's going on with the gut, because there's such a brain-gut connection. And the gut's just such a big central mechanism for everything. And the things that are important for gut health turn out to be very important for brain health. And if you're doing something to optimize gut health, you're optimizing brain health and vice versa.
So I think about the situation like a really simple way we could explain it to somebody is I feel anxious. And a common thing that happens when I feel anxious is that my stomach hurts, right? It's this feeling, it's this mental state. The anxiety then turns into a physical state within my gut. And then what happens? So we know that there's a connection between mental health and physical health. And the way that our mental health is being manifested in physical ways and symptoms, it's almost like our body's telling on us, right? Maybe there's situations in which we kind of suppress or push down elements of our mental health, but then the body is coming up with unique ways to let us know, yo, something is wrong here. We need to address this. So when somebody comes to you and they say, okay, Dr. David, I've got an autoimmune disorder. I've got, let's call it arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, right? What do you do? How do you unpack with this person to find the root cause behind it and to help support them for healing?
Because we know so much about autoimmune disease, it actually makes it easy. If we already know there's an autoimmune process going on, we're like, oh, okay, so this is going to make it easy. We know exactly where to look to figure out why you have this. What's the root cause of this autoimmune disease, but also why that body part is the one being attacked versus another body part. What's making that body part kind of the weak spot? And you get all these things going like the gut, invariably the brain always gets involved. The brain is always getting dragged down because of what's going on in the system. Let's say the gut is maybe one of the central mechanisms, and people get like a ton of gut symptoms going on. Well, when the gut's just a total mess, the gut's an issue. But the gut's such a central mechanism. You can have no gut symptoms whatsoever. It's just showing up as other stuff in the body. And so it may show up in some people as brain-related issues. It may show up in other people as like joint issues. It may show up in other people like fatigue issues or things like that. But the underlying issues are the same in everybody, including this gut disruption that will disrupt the immune system. And then a person says, well, I got this body part that's not the happiest camper. One of the things that I think is a shame is when it comes to mental health and brain stuff is people tend to equate their brain stuff with what that's who they are as an individual. And so I'll hear things like, I'm a depressed person. I've always been a depressed person. Everybody in my family is a depressed person. We're just a whole bunch of family of depressed people. That's just who we are. And I go, well, that's not how it works though. If somebody came to me and said, I'm a right knee pain person, that's just me. I've had right knee pain my whole life. I've always been a right knee pain person. Everybody in my family has right knee pain. We're just a big family of right knee pain people. Well, you look at that and go, how ridiculous that is. There's no way that whole families can be right knee pain people. That's just not how it works. But we tend to assign the brain, well, that's just us. I'm just a depressed person. No more than somebody's just a right knee pain person. That's just the physiology and the biochemistry that's going on in the system that's thrown off. And, things run in families, and whole families can kind of have brains as their weak spot, but it doesn't mean that it can't be resolved and fixed. You're just not inherently a depressed person anymore than somebody's inherently a right knee pain person. We should be able to figure out what's causing the right knee pain and make it go away. Same thing with all the cognitive emotional issues that are just so common in epidemic proportions nowadays.
So when someone comes to you and they say, hey, I have this pain, you're looking for an underlying mental health challenge that's connected with that. Is that right?
Well, what you'll see is you'll tend to see as time goes on, the person has a health issue that have these central mechanisms that thrown off. Invariably over time, pretty much all the body parts get dragged into the mess. And so somebody may have gut symptoms. They may have, brain symptoms. They may have fatigue symptoms. They may have immune system like allergies and asthma and eczema and those kind of things. And so eventually all the body parts kind of get dragged into the mess. A person may come in with a chief complaint like, well, this is my biggest problem, but then they have a whole bunch of other stuff going on, but everything's connected. And so when you look at these underlying root causes of autoimmune disease, mental health, whatever, you're really looking at the things that are creating all the problem in the body at the same time. And then you're really in a position to actually make them all go away at the same time too. everything being connected, everything should be able to get better. And then this is where you get somebody feeling really great. They've really reversed all these different health issues, these health challenges they have. Now they're in a really great place. Well, now you can lock them in place, and then they stay good for the next 30, 40, 50 years, kind of things. And because you've also done your due diligence to prevent new disease from coming in the future, because you've gotten rid of the root cause of what they got causing problems already.
So I think the thing I'm still not clear on. So I read a book by Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. It talked about the connection between stress and chronic stress and the physical effects that it has on the body, specifically with a lot of autoimmune disorders. I was wondering if we're talking about the same thing, if it's like, hey, there's some sort of mental health challenge that's going unchecked, that's not being supported or treated. And now your body, in order to get your attention, is manifesting pain in other ways to be able to showcase that, to let you know there is something wrong here. And unless you address this underlying stress, this chronic stress, this thing that is continually plaguing you, then these physical symptoms and manifestations are not going to go away. Is that accurate, or am I missing a step or something in there?
No, I think that's right. Any symptom that we have, well, you go, geez, that wasn't there before. No, geez, I haven't had that before. Or maybe, geez, it was a time when I didn't have that, but I've had that for a long time. So body really telling us that something's wrong. And unfortunately, we don't tend to be very great at listening to our bodies. And instead of saying, well, this joint pain must have come from someplace, I probably need to figure out why that is and get rid of it. We just take a Motrin or an Advil. Or I got this depression and I'm not sure where it came from, or anxiety or panic attacks or whatever. It's got to be coming from someplace. But yeah, I need to go back and figure out why, and then I'll feel better. I'll get rid of it. We just go, well, here's Xanax. So I'm very anxious. I get panic attacks. Well, here's some Xanax. So you look at that and it's like, well, if you're so anxious, you can't get through your day, you got to do something to get through your day, right? But we look at like anxiety, it's like, well, of all the things that could create anxiety, the one thing is not doing it is a Xanax deficiency, because there is no Xanax in the body. So it can't be a Xanax deficiency. It's something, but it's not that. But oftentimes we're like, well, what's the big deal? I took Xanax, I feel bad. I've taken care of the problem. Well, no, you really just kind of put a bandage on a symptom, and the problem's going to keep pushing you to new places. And now you develop new mental health issues or new other issues going on. You may have felt like you took care of it because the symptom is under control. And truly, the underlying mechanism wasn't corrected, and that underlying mechanism keeps pushing you the wrong way. And now you got new stuff on top of the old stuff.
Okay. Yeah, this is all starting to click for me. So if I think about it this way, are you familiar with the attachment styles?
Probably not as well as you are, but I've heard of the concept.
So there are 4 basic attachment styles, or an attachment theory, based on how you grow up. One of those is called an anxious attachment style, and it means that there was inconsistent physical or emotional attention given to you by your primary caregiver, right? Sometimes they were around, sometimes they weren't. And so what you learn to do as a child is you learn to look at your parents and think, what can I do to be able to be worthy of getting the attention I need? What can I do in order to be able to be good enough? And so people with anxious attachment styles that they get not to their own fault, it's because the way they grew up, it's the context, the environment of which they grew up. They tend to be people pleasers. They tend to be people who do their very best to make sure that everyone is happy. And one of the phenomenons that I think is really interesting within autoimmune disorders is the type of people who are subject to get these. Oftentimes, you'll find that many people with autoimmune disorders, specifically when you think about things like fibromyalgia or things like that, these are people who are extremely kind to put everyone else's needs above their own. They take the stress that comes with everyday life and they push it down deep inside. They suppress it. They suppress their own needs and desires in order to please their family and their friends and their partners and the people around them. And so what we're starting to understand, and you can say this better than me, is that when we have stress within our life, and to your point earlier, our body is creating antibodies to address sickness when it invades us, right? And stress is often seen as like a sickness. It is often seen just like how our body would treat the flu. But if we're constantly living and swimming in a chronic stress environment that's not being addressed, then our body is going to continue to use antibodies or to try and suppress that and fight that, even though now it can't tell the difference between an infection and the stress that we are just keeping within ourselves. So have you seen that play out? And if not, maybe tell me about the makeup of some of the different people that you're treating and what you're noticing with them.
Yeah, so part of what you're talking about is adverse childhood events. And the adverse childhood events are classic for creating all chronic disease, including autoimmune disease. My wife actually is a psychotherapist, and she's an expert on adverse childhood events and then how that drives chronic disease and autoimmune disease, but also what can be done to reset the whole system. So one of the central mechanisms is the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And the adrenal gland produces the stress hormone cortisol. And so the HPA axis is how our body responds to perceived stress. And a really healthy HPA axis is one that the whole world might be crashing down around us. We're totally chill. That stress doesn't get in us and disrupt us. It doesn't throw off the immune system. It doesn't throw off the gut. It doesn't throw us off. Or a disrupted HPA axis, every little thing that happens gets inside and totally drives us down, where people can say, geez, a stressful thing happened today and I feel terrible. Oh, my stomach, versus a healthy HPA axis is, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but it didn't make me sick. It didn't drag me down, kind of a thing. A healthy HPA axis starts getting set up when a woman's pregnant with a child. So ideally, the mother's healthy HPA axis will set up a healthy HPA axis in the child before they're already born. Or if there's stress if that's been disrupted before conception, that's being disrupted during the pregnancy, all this kind of stuff, that HPA axis is not set up in a great place, even before the child's born. And then even if the HPA axis might be in a fairly decent place, all these adverse childhood events like divorce and separation, substance abuse, incarceration, physical, verbal, sexual abuse, trauma, all these other kind of things, including the kind of attachment thing that you talked about, will further disrupt an HPA axis or disrupt it, kind of setting the stage for then these autoimmune diseases and chronic disease in general.
Wow, how fascinating that starts formulating within a human when they're in the womb, when they're being carried by their parents. And so we tend to think a lot of things when it comes to newborns, they're too young to understand, they're not picking up on these things, that they're not aware of the complexity of the situations that are going on around them. But even from a physical genetic level, from the very get-go, babies and human beings are sponges that are absorbing the stress of the people around them in one way, shape, or form. And I thought it was really fascinating to think about the HPA axis. And it made me think about something you were talking about earlier when you were talking about, I come from a family of depressed people. And I was wondering if you could unpack how that chain of events might be related to generational stressors or generational socioeconomic status or generational racism or traumas or things like that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, this is kind of that generational trauma. We're living the trauma of past generations, right? And there's two different ways that gets passed down. And so one way is through epigenetics. And so we used to think that the genes are DNA that tell the cells what to do. It was hardwired. Whatever we got good, bad, otherwise from parents and grandparents. You look at your parents and grandparents, you're thinking, geez, I hope I got some of their good genes because I don't want some of those bad ones they got because I can see these health issues they're dealing with, right? Well, it turns out it's not what genes you have. It's actually which ones get turned on and turned off. And so there's a ton of bad genes in every cell in our body. Got to turn them on. A ton of good ones, got to turn them on. And that's epigenetics. That's the things that influence gene expression without changing the genetic code itself. When genes are turned on and turned off, if somebody has health issues going on, well, they turn on the bad ones, turned off the good ones. But this is happening in every cell in the body. So it's why it's so easy for you to get one thing and then here's another body part that's not right. And then bing, 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 all these other things, because over time, every body part's being told the wrong information. So things that work through epigenetics that will turn off the bad, turn on the good all at the same time, are the things that have profound impact on the system. We actually see that if you can optimize epigenetics before conception, before conceiving a child, you can actually pass on clear gene expression to the next 6 to 8 generations.
Okay, so you're going to need to unpack this a lot. And for our listeners, epigenetics refers to how behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way that your genes work. So we want to set up, what is the ideal epigenetic situation before a child is born? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So the corollary, though, is we are the product of the previous 6 to 8 generations, right? And so some kind of emotional trauma, physical trauma, some kind of thing happened that would have turned on some bad genes and turned off some good genes, trying to drive them to a health issue, like let's say depression. Well, if they didn't correct it before conceiving a child, that child gets that expression. Now there's new trauma, it throws it off further, bing, bing, bing. And so you sort of get these generational health issues or mental health. That's because not so much of the genes that people have in the family, but it's which ones get turned on and turned off. And so this is where, like meditation, for example, Harvard about 16 years ago figured out that meditation works through epigenetics. If some good genes on, bad genes off, well, geez, this is like could be good for everything. There's certain supplements that the body will make through epigenetics. So, for example, good bacteria in the gut, kind of goes back to the gut health. Good bacteria need to make a lot of things the body needs to function well, including things called short-chain fatty acids. And there's one particular one called butyrate, 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 that almost exclusively works through epigenetics. So in every cell in the body is turning off bad genes, turning on good genes. So it prevents cancer 5 ways. It's profoundly important for lung health and brain health and eye health and gut health and all these other kind of things. Well, you can take it as a capsule because if you have a disrupted gut, maybe your good bacteria are not making enough. So you can take it as a supplement. The liver has to make something called TUDCA, known as a bile acid historically. It helps the gut function well. But we now realize it is a chaperone molecule. It actually chaperones proteins through the production process so they don't get misfolded. And there's this misfolded protein response that is part of all this stuff we see nowadays that is so much more common than it used to be. All the things they call the civilization diseases, including all the mental health, all the brain stuff, kids up to adulthood, neurodegenerative disease, all the brain stuff in kids and adults. Well, this TUDCA addresses all those things, but it also works through epigenetics. So this TUDCA also is flipping genes on and off in every cell in the body. Well, if your liver can't make enough, you can take it as a capsule and it resets the whole system. And so we like to optimize epigenetics in a couple before they conceive a child. So, hey, let's get some meditation going. Hey, let's do some testing. Is your good bacteria making butyrate? Do you have these hallmarks of the liver not making enough TUDCA? And so we want to ideally optimize epigenetics before conceiving a child so they can pass on cleaner gene expression to the next 6 to 8 generations. Now, there's also things you can do during pregnancy to start flipping genes the right way if you haven't had a chance to do that before conception, but also even in a human being that's already, popped out and is fully formed, kids or adults, you can flip those genes in that individual, and that individual feels profoundly better because you've optimized epigenetics, and then they ideally pass it on to future generations. The second thing that gets passed down from generation to generation is the intestinal microbiome, the mix of the good, bad bugs in the gut. You want a lot of the good, not a lot of the bad. And that is a super central mechanism. My wife and I just got back from lecturing in Paris on this subject, and I talked about the 4 maternal microbiomes: intestinal microbiome, vaginal microbiome, blood microbiome, and oral microbiome that determine the fetal intestinal microbiome. The fetus, before it's even born, is developing an intestinal microbiome, and the microbiome with the placenta that connects the mother to the child. So ideally, healthy maternal microbiomes, healthy placental microbiome, fetal intestinal microbiome sets the system in a beautiful place so that the child doesn't get health issues. But also, because the maternal intestinal microbiome is so important. The development of the fetal intestinal microbiome is this disruption in the mother's intestinal microbiome that disrupts the fetal development of the intestinal microbiome that then gets passed on from generation to generation as well.
It's a chain reaction. Okay.
Yep, through the good, bad bug mix in the intestine and other body parts as time goes on. And so this is where the gut is so important, and optimizing that intestinal microbiome is so important. But there's ways that this can be done, like meditation's a good one, but also there's this beautiful field called the circadian biology, the circadian rhythm and how important it is, and photobiomodulation, the impact of light, sunlight on human health and well-being. We got a chance to lecture in Paris is light, particularly the light the first 3 hours after dawn, after sunrise, hitting the eyes, the retina, back of the eyes. Light will hit some of the retinal cells that are called image-forming retinal cells, like the rods and cones. That information hits the image-forming retinal cells, is projected to the part of the brain called the visual cortex. So we can see images, like I'm seeing you right now and you're seeing me. Those other retinal cells back there are called non-image-forming retinal cells. Light hits those guys, they project information to all these different brain parts, including the brain parts involved in emotions, like the amygdala, parts involved in mood, parts in circadian, the hypothalamus. So it's part of that's HPA Axis health. The circadian rhythm part, because every cell in our body has its own circadian rhythm, this 24-hour kind of cycle, including the intestinal microbiome has a rhythm that when it hits the circadian rhythm part, not only does it help with sleep-wake cycles, that's so important, but it helps with this intestinal microbiome gut health. And you're optimizing the intestinal microbiome, optimizing HPA Axis health. So let's say a mother during pregnancy lets the sun hit her eyes. Well, she's optimizing her intestinal microbiome. That's helping the fetal intestinal microbiome development. It's hitting her hypothalamus to set her HPA axis in a better place, which is going to set up a healthier HPA axis in the developing child. But this will make it even cooler. If you let that same light hit your abdomen, pick your shirt up and let the light hit your abdomen, it optimizes the intestinal microbiome, including the good bacteria that build from sunlight hitting the abdomen are predominantly butyrate producing good bacteria in the gut. They make more of this butyrate we talked about. That works almost exclusively through epigenetics. But these non-image forming retinal cells are such a central mechanism in our health, not just brain health, but circadian rhythms and HPA axis and everything that goes on early in the second trimester. Like 1/3 of the way through the pregnancy, the baby's eyes have already formed these non-image forming retinal cells. Babies see light starting early in the second trimester. Babies can see light coming through the abdominal wall. And by seeing light coming through the abdominal wall, it's so profoundly important for brain development, including the parts involved in emotions, mood, circadian rhythms, and that healthy HPA axis production.
There's some really tangible takeaways from this. I just want to make sure I'm summarizing these right. First of all, if you find yourself as a pregnant woman and you want to optimize your whole baby experience and this human that you're creating, you need to wake up the first 3 hours of dawn. You need to meditate. You need to get some sunlight on your eyes and also some sunlight on your belly. And the effects of both meditation and light on your eyes and in your belly is helping your gut microbiome. It's helping your eyes. It's helping all of these things connected with your HPA axis, your way that you respond to stress and the way that you're able to regulate your emotions. So the majority of our listeners, may I even venture to say all of our listeners, are not babies in the womb. And there might be a smaller amount of us who are pregnant folk, but for those of us who are neither, who are not babies in the womb and who are not pregnant folk, the idea of turning on good things in our body and turning off bad things seems really appealing. Can this be done post being born and all of that stuff? Or once a gene is turned on, can it never be turned off again?
This is what's so fascinating is this epigenetics is something that's totally malleable all the time. So somebody with very well-established chronic health issues can turn this stuff around using these same techniques, just as we're talking about using it more for preventative medicine. But every individual can use this early morning sunlight. As more and more people understand how this can prevent disease and reverse it when it's already established, then we start getting into, hey, we can actually use this stuff to prevent it from happening in the first place. We just didn't know that we could actually give sunlight to babies before they're born that would help them avoid depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, all these kind of things.
So apart from like the supplemental resources that you mentioned, the different types of fatty acids like butyrate that you can intake in like pill form, what are the things that the everyday person who's trying to work on their mental health, somebody who's listening to this, they're saying, yo, I've got some chronic pain. Yo, I've got some depression and some anxiety. Yo, I'm struggling with my ADHD. What are some of the things that you would tell them? Let's do this for the next 6 months to be able to help regulate your HPA axis, to help work on those mental health challenges. What can we do today?
Well, I think one thing you can do, and it's really nice and it's free, is get outside. Get outside without sunglasses on, without sunscreen on your abdomen for at least 2 minutes in the morning. If you do more than 2 minutes, that's fine, but all it takes is 2 minutes. So you're really giving those non-image forming retinal cells and the gut microbiome that information. And it's really helping the circadian rhythm that involves everything, but also then trying to avoid toxic light, which is blue light. So using really high quality blue light blocking glasses when you're on screens and tablets and cell phones, and consistently using it for the 2 hours before you go to bed, because that's particularly toxic blue light time. And it creates a lot of sleep issues, but it creates just a ton of neuroinflammation. The therapeutic light, the avoidance of the toxic blue light, really gets rid of a lot of this neuroinflammation stuff that we're dealing with as an epidemic in our society. And when I say neuroinflammation, I'm just talking about inflammation of the nervous system, inflammation of the joints, inflammation in muscles, inflammation in tendons, inflammation in the brain. It's neuroinflammation. And then the question is, where is it coming from? How can I get it to go away? And then when the neuroinflammation is clearing, you go, hey, my brain's so much happier. Just like you'd probably say my muscles are happier, my joints are happier at the same time.
I've always been a proponent of, as I've been learning more about this research, and you're making me want to reach for my glasses that are blue light blocking. These are my blue light blocking glasses. And if you're listening to this, just know I look great in them. I take them off when I do a podcast because they tend to reflect some of the visuals that's coming across in the video, but you make me want to wear them all the time now. But just summarizing some of these thoughts, one of the things I've always tried to do is to go outside without sunglasses and get some sunlight on my eyes, my direct eyes, without my blue light blocking glasses, at least some every single day. But two things I'm learning from this is, one, doing that earlier in the day in the first 3 hours of dawn would be helpful. And also getting some on my belly, getting some sunlight on my belly. I live in San Diego, so I have no excuse. I can go outside year round and be shirtless probably, and that's okay. And you also mentioned meditation as like a primary thing. What are you understanding about meditation, and maybe even some other mental exercises or ways that we can continue to help broaden the way we understand stress and our resilience to stress and turning on the right epigenetic factors?
Well, I think stress of all kinds is so toxic to the body, whether it's excessive emotional stress, whether it's physical stress, such as a vitamin deficiency, a hormone imbalance, the infections that drive chronic disease to the body. Just stress is stress. And excessive stress of any kind throws off the stress hormone cortisol, that HPA axis, which is such a central mechanism. And so anything we can do to create calm just helps the body get into a position to actually reverse chronic disease, optimize epigenetics, optimize an intestinal microbiome. So meditation is a classic one, but truly meditation, repetitive prayer, deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, getting out of nature, looking at a tree, looking out your window at a tree, hugging a tree, doing indoor gardening, anything you can do to interact with nature, including sunlight, is so therapeutic for all this kind of stuff. As human beings, we grew up in nature. We're not really designed to be indoors all the time. And that's made it kind of challenging for our bodies to stay as healthy as we can. So anything we do with nature and anything we can do to create calm really puts the body in position to be able to fix things so much nicer.
And this makes sense because when we think about trauma therapy, the biggest predecessor for trauma therapy is having some sort of way to be able to regulate your emotions when they become dysregulated, whether that's through deep breathing, whether that's through visualization, whether that's through paired muscle relaxation, as you mentioned earlier. A therapist or somebody who's really skilled in this is going to have a whole toolbox worth of things that they're going to be able to work with you on. It's going to be individualized to help you figure out what's the right coping mechanism for you to help regulate your emotions and to de-stress, which I think is a really important part. But I wanted to point out one of the things that you mentioned, and that was about excessive stress. So you said all excessive stress is bad, but how do we determine what is excessive stress versus a good amount of stress, maybe that we have from something like exercise?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so there's good stress, like exercise. You stress body parts, they come back stronger, healthier, sturdier, all that kind of stuff. Learning something new, like a new language, or picking up a book and reading something that you haven't read before. You're basically stressing your brain. You're making it remember stuff and think differently and all this kind of stuff. That's the kind of good stress. Our body kind of then uses that as a cue to build itself up stronger, healthier, sturdier, all this kind of stuff. But anything taken to the extremes can be excessive. So people that, let's say, are training for a marathon, triathletes, that's just way more physical stress than's healthy for the system. And the system tends to break down and all these kind of things. Now, cortisol, or the stress hormone, can become so disrupted that activity and exercise that we would usually think would not be excessive actually will beat us up. So people will say things like, geez, when I try to exercise, I might just get on the treadmill for like 5 minutes, get on the stationary bike for 5 minutes. I have to take a nap. I'm so beat up. I'm so tired, or I hurt for 4 days after that. And we're like, yeah, that's that cortisol. That's so disrupted that now you are not in a position to let exercise. You can't exercise your way out of this anymore, because exercise actually is beating you up rather than building yourself up. So if you're somebody who's trying to do some exercise, for example, and you feel like you're beat up, like soreness is one thing, but like you're actually beat up, you're like, oh man, my cortisol must be really whacked. Something has created so much stress in my system that my stress hormone cortisol is so disrupted, I can't even tolerate good stress like exercise any longer, kind of a thing.
Yeah. And along the lines of cortisol, can you touch on, and I dare to even bring this up because I'm a coffee fanatic, but can you talk about caffeine and coffee? Is there a relationship between that and elevated cortisol levels, or how does that work?
Yeah, so cortisol has a circadian rhythm, a 24-hour cycle. So ideally it starts highest in the morning and then slowly goes down as the day goes on. Hitting its low spot at bedtime, we call fast asleep. Nothing keeps us awake. We get this great restorative sleep of the dead, and then cortisol pops back up again in the morning. We're jump out of the bed, ready to take over the world all over again. And that's the typical circadian rhythm. Now, many of your readers might go, geez, that doesn't sound like mine. It gets disrupted in a lot of people. That's why we got to fix it, because that's so important to get that circadian rhythm. That circadian biology is so important. And so if you need coffee to get going in the morning, that's a sign that the circadian rhythm is off. Your cortisol isn't really where it's supposed to be to get you jumping out of bed. You need something to kind of help you jump out of bed, kind of a thing. Now, if you're somebody whose circadian rhythm is pretty good and you drink coffee, it's not going to be a big deal. But if you need to use coffee to kind of get going in the morning, you know something's up. Even though it might get you going, right? You've got to make feel better, but it's not quite how it's supposed to be. And then what you're doing with the disruptive stress hormone cortisol, you're kind of kicking cortisol up into the stress mode, and you drink coffee. So now you're whacking a system that's already been whacked, that may not be so therapeutic for you, kind of a thing. If you're somebody that likes coffee, the taste, you drink it just because you like it in the morning, there's 1 to 2 cups of coffee, less colon cancer risk. So it's got some very therapeutic benefit to it. But if you're using it to get going in the morning, cortisol rhythm, 24 hours circadian rhythm's off, and you're probably kind of slowly but surely whacking it with the coffee intake.
I feel like I have just been plugged into the matrix and downloaded a ton of new information into my brain from this conversation. I have a feeling people, when they hear this, they're going to want to understand more of what you're talking about and learn more about you and all the work that you're doing. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Sure. They can go to drdavidbilstrom.com. And we have lots of educational material. I write a lot of blog posts, including early morning sunlight is one of the more recent ones we got. We have courses for non-medical people. We have courses for medical people, including there's a free online educational email course that really deep dives into these central mechanisms, cortisol, gut microbiome, such things like that. And each one's only about a 6 to 8 minute read, so it's not overload. People get a really good idea of where this stuff comes from, and what you can actually do on your own to reverse the whole process.
And listeners and watchers, you will find all of that stuff linked up in the description box or in the show notes for this episode. So if you are somebody who's got an autoimmune disorder, if your body's in pain, if you're struggling to get out of bed, if you have chronic fatigue or pain, or you know that your gut is thrown off of balance, just know that we get that that is real. But as Dr. David Bilstrom has explained to us, it is much more common than we understand. But with the help of the techniques that we've talked about, doing things like meditation, getting some sunlight, working on our stress levels, all of those things, it's also treatable. We will see you on the next episode. This episode of Treatable was edited by Daniel Lopez. The intro and explanatory sections of the episode were written by Alexandra Kruger. The theme song was created by Sebastian Gonzalez, and the cover art for this episode is created by Joel Daniel. If you got any value from this episode, it would personally mean the world to me if you would leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps to spread mental health awareness to more folks, and I read each and every comment that people leave. So tell us what you appreciate about the podcast, and you just might hear us feature it on the next episode. All of my love, and we'll see you on the next one.